of expertise by a long shot. So we wanted to understand your research area, especially the whole domain of the mesoporous composites. So we looked up a bit on it and tried to understand what they are and the kind of commercial application that has. So we are more looking towards research and the kind of commercial applications they can have in the long run. So if you could just broadly discuss some of those things. And then we have an idea of our own, and we would just like to put it across and get your feedback as to what do you think about it.
Think about this. So, what's your background first of all?
So I'm a textile engineer.
Okay.
I did it from India, and
I did my biotechnology. So I had a touch. I did some work in nanotechnology as well.
Okay.
So, but that's more related to medical intervention. Like, say for example, a nano carrier that actually carries the drug that can bypass the blood-brain barrier.
Okay.
So the nanoparticle is called transposomes. So that is exactly which I was working on.
So you decorate a nanoparticle.
Oh yeah. So that this
something.
nano vesicle will have the both hydrophobic and hydrophilic character.
Yeah. Okay.
So it can carry the drug molecule.
That's
and it
kind of biochemical engineering.
Biochemical plus nanotechnology. So that's when I was working on. That was like pretty long back, like 4 years back I was working on. And now I lost the touch in this.
Migrated to the business.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay, right, yeah. Well, mesoporous composites. The key of this is the porous and the mesoporous, which means you have a very large surface area.
Okay.
Which is accessible somehow or the other. Okay. And I'm not so sure where from your end where the composite comes in, because a composite is two components which together make more than the two alone. And a mesoporous solid as such is just something like a mesoporous polymer or something. It's just one material which is porous.
Yeah.
So composite, you mean probably to then functionalize the inside of the pores to do something sensible or something useful. Is that the definition which you've been thinking of?
It's close to what we were thinking of. We didn't actually put in so much thought in terms of differentiating between mesoporous composites versus pure mesoporous single element surfaces. What we were extremely interested in knowing was how do you go about building the application for soil and water absorption, because that is something you did as one of your research
for
areas.
Cleaning up.
Yeah. So how does
well, let me take one step back. One interesting EU project which I don't know where it went to in that area, which I've done 15-20 years ago almost now, was this idea of lock and key, where you basically and that's particularly in terms of drug removal.
Okay.
Which is you're basically using a material, a drug, some kind of a drug which you want to remove, and make or build your material around it, and then remove it, and then use that as the matrix to remove it again. So you basically take the key, you build the lock around it, you take the key out, and then when another key comes in and if it fits, then it would remove it. and that's something at the time. For instance, there was discussions in taking some kind of so really drugs of abuse,
Okay.
some kind.
Yes. Yes.
Anything like LSD or something like that,
Okay.
from the body, from the blood, so you could clean out that and take out the drug, but not take the rest out.
Yes.
As such. And to some degree it works, except that even on a relatively, that's those molecules are relatively large for a physicist or chemist. Even on that, there's too much motion in the system at room temperature. The things start. You can imagine it. There's motion. That's not so essential or effective, and you could do this also. We were looking. There was a collaboration across Europe. We're looking at other areas, sort of anything which is in your blood isn't good for you, like cancer cells or so. And the idea of basically, making the pores and letting things go in through just a sort of like a chromatography column, like that. You flow through and the things get stuck there.
So is it related to the surface tension which is created because of the
and it's also because you can then you look at the molecule and you see certain functional groups like OH groups, which have an electric dipole, and then you make basically an opposite there chemically, so that they basically stick by by electrostatics or something like that.
So the surface of the absorbing material or the pores is basically functionalized so that it can
exactly. So that's why this occurs to me immediately when you guys talk about this. So this idea of the having a large surface and having some kind of a lock and key type concept, and that would also be in terms of what you could do for cleaning up, say, water. You'd need to functionalize the inside of just a polymer matrix or just a ceramic matrix of some kind. I mean, there's plenty of matrices which you could use as such. And what I'm just thinking in something like this would be that you almost need, depends on what you want to remove really, but you'd almost need an ion rather than an atom or a molecule. So in a sense, what would help would be to ionize the material with a UV lamp or something like that, and which makes from a commercial point of view an interesting aspect, because you can switch the thing on and off as such.
So have these found any commercial application?
Listen, I don't know is the answer.
Oh, okay. So
I'm thinking now as a physicist with a materials background, and what you could do with that. The big problem with all these business things, I mean, I've tried to start 2 companies, and to be perfectly honest, none of them took off as a company. But each of them produced. Well, we produced IP before, and then we tried to commercialize it, and then we decided that what happened with all this is we were way too early for the market. And therefore, it becomes difficult to function, to fund the whole thing, and about 10, and then we kind of licensed the whole thing to larger companies, who then sub-license it to the really large guys. And in the end of the day, the college gets a few bob, and actually in practice, nothing comes back to the inventor here. I mean, 50 euros, something like that, isn't really something going to make a change. A meal with a wife, but a lot of this is, when you're sort of thinking ahead, the big issue is it's got to be right. The timing needs to be right for the market, and you need to have, and there is a longer period than you usually wish from conceptually seeing something to actually converting it into a tangible product. That's where you guys are. That's I mean, as scientists, you make that step very easily, but when you're actually have to deliver something which works every day, it's a different thing to showing it in the lab once. So I think that's the key in terms of a entrepreneurship type thing. If you're looking at, say, heavy metals which you would want to remove, I think you could probably do, an obvious system, for instance, where I don't know the chemistry off by heart, so well off by heart, but what I know, for instance, if you functionalize a surface with sulfur, then it'll take out gold, because gold binds to sulfur very well. So you could take gold particles out. That would be one option.
So, in the entire broad field of nanotechnology, what are the areas in which research has mostly been focused upon? And what are the areas that have actually found their way into the commercial markets?
I think most of the things which are commercial or have found use are not the sort of stuff. It's just marginal improvements to current technology. An example, for instance, a good example is petrol pipelines in cars. The problem with those is that you cannot make them from plastic, because plastics are not conducting electricity, and therefore you have an ignition problem or a fire problem. So what you do is you functionalize, you put something on which conducts electricity, and that stops the problem of static. If a spark comes and it goes boom, that's not what you want with your car. But what people, for instance, use there is either, it's ideal to make them out of plastic, because they're flexible. Metal pipelines are just not flexible, and so people use something like silver or copper or aluminium. No, aluminium isn't that good, but some metal particles. But you need an awful lot of them in there, and the smaller the better in that case. But then what you can do is you can use tubes, and this is where, for instance, carbon nanotubes, which are very long, thin structures which conduct electricity, are useful, because you can imagine that it's much easier to connect something which is long than having a lot of lumps around the place, which you need a lot of them. So you need much less what we call percolation. Percolation is when there's a connection through. That threshold is way smaller. and therefore you can use less material, and it's also the more you put into a plastic, usually the more brittle it gets. So therefore, it stays flexible, and it's just easier to do. And I think that's an example, for instance, which is just a marginal improvement on something, but there's a couple of companies who make a good business out of it, and there's an awful lot of cars around the place. So I think about 30% or so of cars have that kind of technology in there. And that wasn't when we talked about carbon nanotubes. I started on this probably in the early 80s or something there. And that wasn't because we were sort of looking at all sorts of other things like making transistors out of them. Yes. But the problem with, say, making transistors is it does work and it makes good transistors, but you can make one. Yeah. But if you think about one of those guys here, here there is 10 to the 6 or so million of these guys, and you've got to make them all in one step or in. So there's a huge step between what you dream of and what you can make as a practice.
So does it? So just carrying on from what you just mentioned. So is there like the issue of scalability with some application nanotechnology that you can make one, but it's very difficult to actually make a million?
Yes, exactly. Right? Yeah, especially in terms of something like in terms of something like electronic devices or something, and then you're always against. I mean, even if you can make the million, you're against the whole technology which exists already, and which has billions of dollars per fab invested in out here and everywhere, and they're not going to change that very rapidly, and so there's a big lead in, and there's also this sort of, I mean, you guys know that better. If something works and you make money out of it, you keep it working. You don't change quickly into something else. If you do, then the risk is, of course, enormous. I think that's an example. Scalability is, price is the other thing. That's the issue with carbon nanotubes, for instance, is the actual price in making it or something like that isn't very high. But what the market allows is pretty high in that case. So, you pay for the know-how in that case. And if you have something like in this car application or something where you need very little, then price doesn't become an issue. And good example is batteries, for instance, as well, which is the other area, which is these graphene sheets, which aren't really graphene sheets. It's just small particles of graphite. Graphite basically is being used in batteries, but what they find is that you make smaller graphite particles, and the battery keeps the charge longer or charges faster or something like that. That's a typical marginal improvement, and it comes again from the fact that you have bigger surface area for nanoparticles in that case. So the nano really is just a geometric factor in that case. If you're talking about the nanoporous, then it's more than a geometric factor. It's in fact the fact that you can functionalize something on the inside to add a benefit to that.
So we talk about surface absorbers at nanoscales, like the one you just mentioned. So when I look at, say, cars, right, I mean, they're one of the biggest polluters in the world because of the exhaust.
Yeah.
So how come till now we haven't seen cars coming with filters at the end of the exhaust, which basically filters out the pollutants from the exhaust pipe? I'm just curious.
I think that's probably more a commercial issue than a technical issue in that case. I mean, there is of course, you have what do you call those guys? I'm trying to think of catalysts. I mean, you can kind of break down the things, and people didn't do it until some kind of regulation or a legal requirement comes. And it's the same here, I think, and it's the same thing with the electrical cars or something like that. You know, it was possible to do years ago, but it wasn't done because there was no regulation. So some headbanging ideas, like the guy in Schwarzenegger in California, who says, we don't want electric cars by then, and everybody says, no way, this cannot be done. And then if you're kind of you got to force it somehow, and that probably has to come from the legal side. And that's probably the same reason it's not, the pain isn't big enough yet, but maybe it is big enough in places like Beijing or something.
Delhi, our city is very polluted.
Yes, or I don't know. I mean, I guess Mumbai or something is a very similar issue here. Unless the politicians take the step, I think that's then suddenly solutions appear, and then because anything you add adds the price, and it adds a risk, and even if the risk is if it doesn't work, then you have to replace it and all this thing.
So what's the government's say for example Irish government's interest towards the nanotechnology? Like what specific type of technology the government is willing to support to commercialize in the near future, or like next 5 to 10 years? So is the government really interested in developing nanotech products in Ireland?
I think it's if I'm perfectly honest, I think there is no serious plan.
Oh.
There is. I was at some stage. I was on a working group called Nano Ireland, and they produced a report. I think it's probably somewhere on the Department of Enterprise or so. There's a Nano Ireland report, and there was all sorts of ideas around, mainly medical device ideas. As I said, sort of sort of drug delivery, drug, mainly delivery. I mean, there's the surface area, and you can control the time. There was all this sort of electronic stuff, and I mean, everybody likes kind of, they have a couple of good multinationals here, and they try to keep them happy. I think what should be there, which I don't really see an awful lot of, is smaller companies which have a niche market. I think that's one thing which, say, I'm originally German, as you can probably hear. A lot of sort of small areas in Germany, they're in mechanics, fine mechanics or something. They make little wheels or little springs or something like that, and it's a tiny area, but they're kind of, nobody else does it in the world, so they're kind of, they have their niche market, and that's a global niche market. And I think that that's one thing which doesn't really exist in a large way here, and which I think would for a smallish country, and I think on a global scale, if you think about it, something like Germany or Austria or Holland or something, or Ireland for all means, is a small country. I mean, compared with China,
yes, exactly,
or compared with India, or compared with America, or Brazil or something, it's a small.
Yes.
And I think you one of those small companies will basically keep a whole village or something going. And I think that's kind of missing, and that's what should be done, in my opinion, but isn't done enough, at least. It has happened when, say, multinationals in Galway split up, and there were these little biotech companies appearing. Some survived, some didn't. And I think in nano, that would be another issue, that people just have to try various things and get them off the ground on a very well defined area, rather than go and look in terms of making TV screens or something like that. Which, as I said, even the technology drag is so enormous because you're fighting against something which works already. So something new, as you say, or something which adds benefit to something existing. Like, as you say, clean up the car exhaust or something like that would add a benefit to something. It's only a minor attachment.
Yes.
It can be a use and throw filter.
Yeah.
You put it on for a week, then you change it after a week. Right? How? So if we just talk about that filter again, just a broad understanding. Is it very costly to build activated surfaces? Is that one of the reasons why industry so far, unless there's regulation, has stayed away from really exploring how nanotechnology can help solve some of the problems?
That's. I mean, I think that's. Yeah, the issue is that in order to remove, have you talked to the guy in chemistry, Baker?
No.
I think he is one of the areas cleaning up pollution water, polluted water. But what I see from, I've only sort of peripherally seen, but what I see is that those molecules which he uses are quite complex. And something which basically has 15 synthetic steps. Every step in a commercial site costs. And every step has a loss as well. So it's got to be something few step. In that case,
to find commercial application.
That's true. Unless it's a serious, I mean, it's medical issues are different in that case. But for a sort of bulk applications like car exhaust or so, but it wouldn't be. I mean, I don't know the chemistry exactly, but I could see that you can of course build nanoporous polymers very easily, and functionalize those somehow. By functionalizing the polymer, functionalizing polymers is not too hard either. And then you use some kind of a foaming agent and polymerize them, and then remove the foaming agent. You have your mesoporous solid. There, it doesn't need to be very organized pores. I mean, you can have basically organized pores, which all go in the same direction, same diameter, or they can be randomized. Like DuPont has this thing called Nafion, which is a perfluorosulfonate membrane, which does some jobs like this would even be interesting to see if anybody's done something with it, which they can sell in tons basically. I don't know what they sell it for, but it's something like that. So it's doable. And if you then could sort of functionalize that separately, then you have your own IP, or at least know-how. I don't know what I mean, if you're using a polymer from DuPont or something like that, you probably difficulty finding something which hasn't been covered as in clause 17C or so on a patent or something. But if you just do something to them, and then it's your know-how rather than your IP in that case, would be, I would base it on more on know-how than IP actually, something like that. Universities always go for IP, but most of the IP is IP and then gets buried. Yeah, because it's expensive. And and that was our problem with the IP as well, because we were way too early. So then only at some stage a very large company who can wait for 10 years takes it, and then they sub-license or something.
So where do you see this field heading in 10 years, 20 years down the line? Where do you feel nanotechnology as a field will really impact lives of millions?
Well, if you look at market forecasts, they have the $1 billion and $1 trillion and all that kind of thing. I'm personally always very skeptical about those things, because there's a lot of enthusiasm, which doesn't translate itself into dollars at some stage. I think the way I can see it heading is one big field is somewhere renewable energy. I think that's an issue for us all, because the energy consumption in the world goes up, and nobody wants to go back. Oil is limited in the end of the day, and you take it on. So I think possibly adding functionality to solar technologies, to mechanical improvements on wind technology, that kind of thing. I can see that could be a very large area. The other area I think is also the biomedical end. A lot, and that point of at that level you can have the kind of complexity, and you have to ensure that it's safe and it's functional and everything, drug release and controlled release and controlled transport to specific sites, and
the biomarkers they call it.
Sensing,
exactly.
Online sense, or not online, but this sort of G5 sensing that you have something which if you have a heart attack gives immediately it does something, or gets you at least into hospital rapidly or something like that. Something along those lines. I think energy is a big field. I cannot really personally, people say IT is, in the widest sense, communication, computing. I personally cannot see an awful lot which you can add as massive benefit to that. You can, of course, add marginal benefits to this, but I'm careful about those things, because just to give you an example, late 90s or so, I was at that. I mean, one of the areas I'm working on is, I'm still working on is basically nanomaterials for optical communications, for higher speed, and so on. And I was at a conference at the time in Japan, and the Minister for Communications, it was mid 90s or something like that. The Minister for Communication gave a speech at the dinner, and he said by the year 2000 or so, we want everybody to be able to talk to everybody else everywhere in the country, mobile phone. And all these guys, IT and materials guys on the table said, impossible. It was possible. So I'm very careful about those things. You know, everybody now has this, and I'm been in Tanzania or somewhere with a Maasai. And suddenly the thing rings and the guy goes under his thing and pulls out the phone. Shepherd. So there is, you know, you have to be careful what you predict. It's very hard to predict. But I think that the big market benefits are going to be in adding benefit to what is existing technologies, like making more efficient solar cells, making coatings for windows which are energy preserving, reflecting infrared, conducting or barrier properties for heat and so on. The sort of, I think that it's probably going to be, apart from the medical end, it's going to be the more large scale type things, which change, which sort of affect our regular life. And energy is the big issue at the moment. I don't need to tell you guys. You probably have enough lectures on this.
So we are just started working on this concept where we saw that globally there are about 600,000 deaths due to passive smoking.
Yes.
And that is primarily due to the smoke coming from the tip of the cigarette. Because what we don't realize, 85% of the total smoke which comes out in a lit cigarette comes from the tip. And that's higher in toxicity because the burning is heterogeneous, extremely heterogeneous. The temperature varies, etc. So you have a lot of unburnt compounds which also get released. So we were thinking if it's possible to actually build a filter around it. And using activated surfaces, if we can extract the toxins from the smoke.
So just activated charcoal. Which is graphene.
Okay. So we just wanted your feedback, given your expertise in this domain, whether something like this technologically is feasible. So just to give a brief idea of the composition of the smoke. So it has 43 carcinogenic elements which basically cause cancer and other respiratory diseases, out of which the major proportion of just 4 compounds, that's carbon monoxide, ammonia, and I think hydrogen cyanide, I'm not too sure right now. So the idea is to break these 4 compounds. Is this something which you feel, given your experience, is technologically feasible, and can it be replicated on a large scale cost effectively?
I mean,
the rest is textiles, which is covered. That is not too much of an issue to build out. It's just this part which is
I mean, what you have to remember is that the gas mask works very well.
That's something,
and that is activated charcoal. So that's coal or carbon. And then if you think in terms of nano, then I mean the sheet system is basically graphene. So that's kind of a large surface area charcoal, if you think about it. So it does work. Because we know that gas masks work. And graphene has the benefit where you could do it probably with charcoal, which is coal or graphite nano or microparticles even, you know, uh, just big graphite mines and so on. Sri Lanka, for instance, and multinationals do nothing else. And that certainly will take out a good few of the sort of toxin type materials. And it would be probably cheap enough as a throwaway material.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
The way I would go about it is exfoliated graphite. What you can do is, you can read this up somewhere. What you can do is, if you're using if you have graphite and you treat it with sulfuric acid, and then you heat it, then it goes poof.
Okay.
It blows up, and what it does, it just automatically basically lift the sheets away and make a nano to microporous solid automatically. That's something which people are thinking of at the moment, or actually probably there's products for building, for blockage, for blocking fires.
Oh, okay.
You know, you put it in a fire door, and if the temperature reaches a certain temperature, it goes and expands and produces a barrier,
like a vacuum.
You're well, air, just an air barrier, between
the fire.
and so it's like when you have a fire in a forest and you make a gap in between, and that should, in a sense, rather than using it, you could do this before, and then use that as your filter. That would probably, graphite is cheap. The process is not difficult. If you look at the literature, there's plenty of literature called exfoliated graphite. That would probably do it. It's a nanoporous functional system. If you then need to additionally functionalize it, I don't know. You need to try and see what happens. And then the whole thing could just be thrown away if you're looking at this cigarette, which would be better than having a recycling system.
So, in terms of commercial application, what we're thinking is that any user, I mean, at the end, the best would be if we are actually able to build this out, and there can be some kind of government regulation which says that you cannot smoke in public without having a filter like this. And find a big tobacco company to actually license it and produce it. Because we ourselves cannot really go out there and get people to use it from day one. There'll be a very small niche who may be ready to adopt a product like this.
And it's got to be sold or marketed as the healthy option.
So what we're thinking is that this part should be detachable, the use and throw part. So say you smoke 20 cigarettes and you change this, the filter, which is activated charcoal or whatever composite it is, and the rest is a one-time purchase. So the rest of the filter, which basically covers the entire cigarette, and this is detachable, so like a razor and blade model. So this is the idea. Now, as students with very limited resources and no access to research labs, how can we actually go about building this? That's the big question mark. And also the process for IP. Like, can we go for a IP before we actually build it out with just a concept, or do you actually need to build it before you can file for IP?
I think you need probably an example for an IP.
Because I've done a lot of research around past IPs for applications like this. There was one filed in 1994, but back then in general, the field of nanotechnology wasn't advanced enough to actually build this. So it was just concept that, okay, we'll have a filter and it will extract toxins. But that expired about 15 years back. They didn't renew the IP. So, I mean, this is not really a field with any kind of, at least IP barriers so far.
Yeah, I think the as I said, the key thing I would do first is just read up a little bit on this sort of exfoliated graphite type stuff, if that works. Doing it is, but in a sense, what I could do if you think that's a good option there, what I could get you in touch with somebody who makes those things, which is a graphite company back in Germany. They have an R&D lab. We've been talking about the research with these guys, but we never got there. For the very simple reason that the college is so complicated. And getting a contract is...
So roughly, if we say partner with the lab, how much would they, ballpark figure, I know it's hard to estimate, but what would be the range in which they would quote to actually carry out the research and do the product development? Because they'll give an indication of the kind of resources that need to be raised to develop the product.
For something like that, difficult. If you're talking about university, they would usually, people would say, a master's project, which is for something like that, which is a two-year master's. So you're talking about 60,000-80,000 or something. If you approach it from a commercial side, you'd say you take a dedicated engineer with experience. 3 months, I'd say, something around that time, and it'll come probably to about half what I said before, about 40,000 to 30,000 or something thereabouts.
So the research lab in Germany can actually...
Well, that guy, these guys make these exfoliated graphites and so on. They would probably, if they're interested, they would probably just engage and just try it with you guys. But then you lose your IP for that.
Yes.
Or at least part of your IP.
So what is the way we can actually protect the IP? That is another question. So I'm trying to talk to a research lab in North Carolina, who are an advanced lab in nanofibers. So now this is one thing which a lot of people have warned me, that when you discuss, they can just take it and build it out themselves. Does that really happen? Is that something to fear? And what are the protective mechanisms that can actually be put in place for something like this?
Well, the issue with the universities is that the university owns the IP. So your chance that the professor goes off and does something on his own are very, very limited generally. Also, you don't forget, we're not in academia because we want to make money and do a business. If I wanted to make, that's why we didn't take our own ideas further, because in the end of the day, you've got to ask yourself, what do you want to do? Well, I think it might be just worthwhile having an initial chat with a patent agent, to just see what do they think you will need to file a preliminary patent.
True.
And or whatever a short-term patent is called. That's needs limited resources, and then you have a year to take it, and at that point you could then engage with people, but you clearly have your backing for that.
True.
So for preliminary patenting also, I mean, like, do we have to have at least a basic prototype of something, or
normally you got to have some kind of example. I mean, it's based on the patent is based on examples.
Like you have to actually make it.
No, you just give an example.
Okay, is it like a research
which
paper or
shows
something
that
like that?
it can principle work.
Okay. So it's like like he said, like a comprehensive research of a proof of concept.
A proof of concept,
without
feasibility study or something.
But a theoretical proof of concept.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to.
It could be a theoretical proof of concept as well, but that's really something which a patent agent would know better what you need and what you don't. It does help these guys if you come along and you have a couple of data and they can use those. But they will. I mean, talking to them is never a harm as long as they don't charge you.
True. Thank you so much.
I hope that
Werner.
helps.
Yes.
Really a lot.
And,
thanks a lot.
There's just one small part left. So, as part of the assignment for Dr. Nora, we have a one-page write-up regarding a business plan in nanotechnology. It's based on this concept, and we'll just share that with you tonight or tomorrow. And could you just take out 15 minutes and just read it and just give us your feedback as to about any part of the business plan, the product, or how you
Is it a proper business plan?
No, this will just be a one-page write-up.
Okay.
Yes. And I'll share this presentation as well with you. This basically explains the entire product, the industry, target customer.
So this would be like more like a proper business plan.
The business model canvas. This is just rough estimates. So we actually presented this in one of the business model competitions and we won that. Good. So, and this is something we've spoken to a lot of investors about, and they are extremely interested. So there's that. We need to figure out what are the kind of resources we need to mobilize, how will we develop it, how will we get the IP, and
let me see, because I have somewhere, I have a summary of this activated charcoal stuff.
That would be great.
Somewhere, or active exfoliating graphite stuff, a review or something, because I was talking to this crowd GK in Graphite Krofmühl, they're called, about this the issue of the expansion with the fire safety, but this is a slightly different aspect. I think I have a summary somewhere. If you send me the stuff, I send you that back.
Exactly.
Saves you from looking around. That would be kind of my approach. I would see one could try. Certainly, I mean, taking the black particles out is no problem. And I think, using a concept of the gas mask, which we know works.
So this is something we actually said, that this already has application in fire safety defense, which is the gas mask, and medical textiles. They also use absorbing properties. That's something I've worked on during my undergrad.
You're absolutely right.
So it's about using a technology that exists, has already been developed, and finding a different application.
In different things, yeah, maybe adding your own benefit to it. True. Okay, so I need to write back to you then with my opinion.
Yes, so we'll share that with you today or by tomorrow end of the day for sure. And it'll just take you like 15 minutes. A short one-page write-up.
Okay, don't worry.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, within a week or something like that.
So,
faster.
So we need to submit it on next Tuesday.
Okay, so you need it.
Yes. We promise it will be extremely short.
Okay. I'll see what happens.
Yeah.
What I can do, because I'll be away for the weekend. So okay, I'll see that I'll get it done before the weekend.
All right, that would be great. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for your
Thanks a lot for it.
No problem. Good luck and congratulations for